I would like to warmly welcome you to the closing panel of the Innocracy conference. My name is Melanie Stein. I'm a journalist and moderator, and I'm very much looking forward to guide you through this discussion. Democratic processes need time, but climate change is going fast. And the question we would like to ask ourselves, how can we improve democratic processes in order to fight against the climate change? We will talk about speed, space and time, and also, of course, about the current political situation. And I would like to welcome three guests here on the panel. Ricarda Lang, she is a member of the German Bundestag. She is the deputy head of the Green Party and also a spokesperson for female affairs. She says that considering the exploration paper of the Socialist Democrat Party, the Green Party and the Liberals is to show that it's high time to take decisions. Please have a seat, Ricarda. And with us is also Martin Dulig. He is the spokesperson for East Germany of the federal SPD. He's also the deputy minister president for Saxony. And he says that Saxony will or should become -- 1 in this context. And Bernd Ulrich is our third guest. He is the deputy editor-in-chief for the newspaper ZEIT. He wrote several books, amongst others, together with Luisa Bauer, We Still Have a Choice. And one of the core theses that he keeps saying is, last century disaster happened by inactivity. Now it is the other way around. A very warm welcome to you. We have time until 7:15. Unfortunately, Ricarda will have to leave us. But you will have the opportunity to discuss with us. So whoever would like to ask a question and discuss, you can get ready for this. But before that, let's talk about the different levels. We would like to talk about speed. I've already mentioned it, that the climate crisis is going on in a with a very vast speed, and we don't have enough time. The question is, how can we change it? So when we are talking about speed, let's have a speed round. I would like to ask you one question and ask you to reply with one sentence. And the question is, what are the opportunities to make democratic processes faster? We could start forgetting that being slowly is a synonym for democracy and reliability. And so everything that was fast never went well. And now we have to do things fast, and they have to go well. And I think this makes sense if you think about it for a long time. Mr. Dulig, I'm not sure if we need faster or speedy processes. We need faster decisions, maybe. And this is something that I experience. When do we decide what and what happens when? Ricarda. I think the essential element is the political will. So this inertia of this political system and also the democratic processes often is used as an excuse in order to say that decisions cannot be taken. So if I really want to decide quickly, I can create the preconditions in a political system, and this should be the task. I've already explained it. You already said that the explorative paper is good. So what do you expect? Of course, there are very precise policy tools. I don't want to mention all this because it will be too long. But what I found really interesting to see so many questions that were raised here on an abstract level, especially during the keynote speech and also during the conference. So we could see that they were really precise and they had to be asked at a very precise level. And we cannot really see what is politically political, but we have to really see the reality. So politics should reflect reality. And when we talk about social policy, for example, we can say we have the liberals that are really far away, and then we join, the Social Democrats join, and they go to this direction. But when we want to transfer this to the climate crisis, it won't work. We don't have the time. We cannot say we do this first step and in 4 years the next step. So we are measured according to reality, and this is something that we saw in the last years. Everyone thought we have to do something against the climate change. At the same time, we have to bring many people on board, and it was kind of a contradiction. So acting quickly and also bringing people on board is a contradiction. It's something also that you said, only when we go slowly we can find a stability. But the opposite is true. If we are too slow, we will lose many people, because the climate crisis doesn't give us the opportunity how to react in the future. And I think this is something that we need to forget and ask ourselves, how can we act quickly and also bring more people to join us in our journey? So how can we make participation possible? How can we make sure that people don't think that decisions are taken fast, but that they are involved in this decision? You mentioned one important point. How are things in reality? And especially when we look at the German elections, we see, for example, that in the eastern federal states, eco-friendliness and protecting the environment are not a top priority. This is understandable, because there are also, of course, other problems. But how can we make sure that protecting the environment is not a question of social status? So I wouldn't just limit it to the social question. In the East, we have this transformational experience where many people said, oh, please, we don't want more changes. It's just the experience that they have with so many changes or radical changes. So I agree with you when you say it is about security, giving or sharing security in this context. And there is the core. We want a safe world. And many people think they want to secure their world, and they don't want to change anything. And then others think it's the entire world, and we have to change everything quickly. And if we try to resolve it on a level, I think it is important. It is, if you don't want too much to change for you, in your little world, you will have to accept that we need to change things. And organizing this process is the task that we hope that the new coalition can tackle. Because I think this is the key. And I come from a federal state where many voters voted the AfD. And we notice that some life experiences or political experiences are conveyed from one generation to the other. But that's a question. Is this also inherited in a way? I would also like to ask Mr. Ulrich. Recently you said during a podcast that people on the lower side of the income scale, they just have completely different problems. But isn't it important? Don't we have to include the entire society? Well, if we are talking about including the entire society, I think this is quite difficult. I think we forgot in the past years that in the discussion, we forgot that we are also a democracy. So the majority does something for 4 years and the others will have to accept it. And after 4 years, you can change it. But if everyone agrees with what is happening, it is just easier. But with the changes that we need, these changes are so dramatic, we cannot say your world will stay the way it is. We cannot share this security that we had. And I mean, I can say it openly, in the last 70 years, stability and safety wasn't the standard, but rather the exception. And that's why, so when we are talking about this lower part of the income scale, so they've been exploited in a double way because they did most of the most difficult work. They had also precarious jobs, and they were exploited also in a different context. So what can they do if they have to pay more for meat? So everyone is eating cheap meat. So what happens to them if they cannot fly to Mallorca, for example? And nowadays, I would say we need a change in politics and to make it possible for everyone to behave in an eco-friendly way. But you cannot demand them to do so. And I think the others need to make the changes. Do we need investments? Oh, please, don't understand me wrong. I'm not talking about a 100% guarantee. I am talking about this security, or safe feeling to know that people are taking care of something. When we are talking about mobility, for example, it is also about having this offer and using public transport, or when you say I have alternative technologies and always buying second-hand cars. And this means I have to make sure that I have something to offer for everyone, so that they can accept this offer. And very often people are willing to do so when they have the feeling that it is possible. And I think this is also something that people say, okay, we can do it, these are the rules, and I accept them. It depends on the question, how do we organize, what do we say with security? Democratic conscious. So this is something that was really individual. So everyone has an individual perception. So when we're talking about this world that we have, I can maintain my living standard. So we won't be able to give it to everyone. And I think this would be also not be very honest, but relying on the collective environment and not being sure about the situation and knowing that there is some kind of security, I think it is always connected. So the CDU used to say for a very long time, no change doesn't create safety. And we asked ourselves, do we want change or not? This is not the question. Climate change is the biggest change that we can imagine. And actually, we have to decide now, are we doing something, or are we taking a passive position and giving away any form of control? Or do we try to adapt to the climate change and mitigate the changes and create, therefore, a feeling of security in a way? A feeling of security and also possibility to control. And people, low-income people, were used often as an excuse, oh, we cannot do this. And many people who said, we cannot do this change, or we cannot have this minimum wage of €8, we cannot raise the price of meat, for example. And people who don't have, or low-income people need to be able to pay for the expenses they have. At the end of the day, I think we have to see if we protect the environment, we can maintain the same or not change the different levels of social inequality. And I think at the end of the day, protecting the environment can lead to the fact that social inequality is not given, or that we can fight against it as well. And I mean, I don't need to say it here in this context. When we say that climate protection is not so important, we say also in a way that maybe one day we will be part of the people who can just pay for their expenses. And we know who won't be able to pay, and that's why they have deserved a better policy.
Now, with the COVID pandemic, we saw a lot of speed. And we also saw that people and politicians were referring a lot to scientists. Why doesn't that work in the climate crisis? How can we manage to listen more to science? Now, with the COVID pandemic, we saw a very rapid development of an emergency, and people, as a matter of fact, were listening to different camps of scientists. That was different depending on the federal state and who wanted to be a candidate for federal chancellor. But it also had to do with the fact that we didn't know a lot about the virus. We do know a lot more about climate change. The tools are there, the science is there, the ideas are there. And what's lacking is this last big step, and that's a huge conundrum really in mankind. Why are we not taking this last step? So it's really not Schellenhuber, the climate scientists, who should tell the governments what to do. I think it's much more about mankind and politicians accepting that the climate crisis is there, and I really hope that the new coalition will manage to do so. And then new questions will come up. Do we want landscapes to look nicely and beautiful without wind turbines, or would we prefer to use our electric SUV in the city? And in order to drive an SUV, you need the wind turbines again. And that's not for the scientists to decide, it's the policymakers. Now, one important aspect in the climate crisis is that it's a global phenomenon. However, our democratic systems are rather national. So the question is, how can we improve democratic processes so that global aspects are being taken into account. And Olaf Scholz suggested the Climate Club, where nations and states should be cooperating. Ricarda Lang, how should such a club function? Well, the idea is that several countries come together and cooperate beyond the Paris Agreement in, let's say, protective tariffs and so on. I think that's an intriguing idea, but it's not going to solve the fundamental problem. Of course, we want nations to cooperate more intensely, and the foundation was being prepared by the Paris Agreement. However, I think the basic dilemma, and I haven't found a solution here, is that the climate crisis affects all of us, but not with the same speed and not with the same intensity. So we are seeing that the countries in the global south are affected much more than the countries in the global north, but they have the tools to take more dramatic decisions. So those who are affected do not have the lever to change a lot, while we do. Of course, we've seen wildfires and floods, devastating floods also in the countries of the global north. Yes, you are right, and we've also seen that with the COVID pandemic. Many people criticize that Germany and the EU do not display a high degree of solidarity when it comes to vaccination justice. Yes, but I still think it's a good idea to establish this climate club and not to wait for majority or power relations to change in each country. And that's also part of a democracy, that, you know, countries form groups, they agree to set higher standards or to progress together. I think that's a good tool to be used and a good methodology. The question is, what are we waiting for? It's about global and international negotiations that you have to conduct, but they shouldn't lead to a situation where we postpone things for many years. It's about speed. We know this. It's not about whether we need to do something, but how. And I think a climate club is really a very concrete suggestion here. Well, the keynote speech inspired me a lot. How can we undo and unlearn? And in international politics, unlearning is very important, because we base what we do on our idea that international policy making has to do with space. The more space I own, the more powerful I am. And the space consists of, let's say, fossil fuels and natural resources. And that's the language we use, and at the same time we're aware of the fact that we will no longer need this in the future. It's incredible that Greece needs a lot of money, to put an example, to buy military vessels to deter Turkey from extracting gas in the Mediterranean. And that didn't happen in the past, it's happening now. And when we look at Nord Stream 2 and Putin, we're dealing with something we should no longer be dealing with. We should get out of this idea of geopolitics. The faster we phase out of fossil fuels, the faster this will happen. So we have to unlearn geopolitics, so to speak. Well, I think phasing out of fossil fuels and looking at the climate impact and that it saves CO2 also helps to, let's say, dismantle harmful power structures, and that should be a priority in foreign policy. Coming back to your question, how can we also take into account the interests of people who are not part of a, let's say, mainstream democracy? We have to turn away from always just giving alms. You know, that's something that we often do, charity. You know, these poor people in Tuvalu, these poor people in the global south. And I think practicing charity is not something that will call people to the polls. And I think this federal election was a case in point. It's not influencing an election, it's not influencing a political decision. So we have to see that there is an equality in interest. We have to see that we may be affected later on, but that we all have the same interest. Namely that we don't want mankind to demise, to go down in this crisis. We have to understand that you're also acting on your own behalf, for your own benefit. Yes, we'll look at future generations in a second, but let me go back to this dimension of space. We're hearing a lot about China. China is responsible for 30% of global CO2 emissions, but when you look at the per capita emissions, China fares much better than Germany.
dieses
However,
Ziel von Paris zu erreichen,
in order to
wie kann da eine
achieve
Handelspolitik
the climate
aussehen mit
goal
China?
of Paris, how can we design our trade policy
Wir haben
with
ja eine
China?
Phase erlebt, wo
we've seen
wir fast einen Handelskrieg ja auch schon hatten,
phase
damals
where we
angezettelt,
almost
Trump,
had a trade
China,
war
was dann
with
auch zur Neuverteilung
China,
von
which
Weltmärkten
was
geführt hat.
somehow
Ich
initiated
denke, was wir wirklich brauchen,
by
sind
Trump
faire
and China. I think what we
Freihandelsabkommen,
need are
Abkommen,
fair
die tatsächlich
trade
fair
agreements
nicht nur
or
im
free
Begriff,
trade agreements,
haben, sondern wo eben die Bedingungen
which
definiert
do not
sind,
only
sowohl
use
soziale
fair
als auch
as a
ökologische
title, but
Kriterien
where conditions are clearly defined,
daher,
social and ecological conditions
wir
are
müssen auf
clearly
der Welt auch
defined.
stärker wirklich
So
wieder zu anderen
here
Abkommen
on this
kommen, im
world,
wahrsten
we
Sinne
really
des
have to
Wortes.
manage to
Denn,
conclude stronger agreements in this
gibt natürlich
respect.
auch nationale Egoismen.
Of course, there is a lot of
Ich glaube auch
national
nicht jeder Zahl,
self-centeredness,
die aus anderen Ländern, gerade auch
and
aus China, kommt.
the figures
Wobei
that
die
we
natürlich
get from
viel
other
Geld
countries,
investieren, tatsächlich auch in
such
den
as
Umbau,
China,
aber das ist,
to my mind, are
also
not
ich bin da
always
noch
very
äußerst skeptisch,
credible.
aber
I
ich,
mean, they do
gehöre zu
invest a
denen,
lot
die
of
der
money
Meinung
in
sind, wir brauchen
transformation, but
neue
I
und andere
do still have
Freihandelsabkommen auf der
my
Welt,
doubts.
tatsächlich
I think
auch
we
Bedingungen
need
miteinander zu
different
definieren.
free trade agreements
Wäre das der
worldwide to change conditions. Do you think that's the right way?
Die EU ja auch machen, braucht man eine
Well,
Steuer, einen Zoll, der sich auf
You know,
ökologische Standards
what do you
bezieht.
think
Und das
that
würde
the EU
die
wants to
Chinesen, glaube ich,
do?
sehr
They would
überzeugen,
like
dass
to
man Produkte
use
nur nach in die
tariffs
EU
that
importieren
are
kann, sinnvoll, wenn man
environmentally
sie
friendly,
einigermaßen
that
CO2-frei produziert. Dann gibt es aber die diskursive Ebene. Ich denke ja immer, ich laufe ja viel rum mit dieser ganzen Klimathematik und es gibt immer zwei Sachen, das sind meine Lieblingsthemen, die ich immer höre seit Jahren und jedes Mal, als wären sie neu, werden sie mir wieder vorgetragen. Das eine ist Wasserstoff, heißt, wir müssen gar nicht ändern, nur der Stoff muss anders sein. Und das zweite ist China. Also wir können machen, was wir wollen, aber die Chinesen. Und wenn ich mit einem Chinesen spreche über dieses, ich hoffe ja immer, dass die Chinesen das nicht hören, wie oft wir hier China sagen, um uns eine Ausrede zu schaffen. Jedenfalls, wenn man mit den Chinesen redet, dann sagen wir als erstes, wenn man das neu kennenlernt, sagen die, also es wäre schon ganz gut, ihr würdet für die historischen CO2-Emissionen mindestens aufkommen, die ihr ausgestoßen habt, als ihr mit euren Kriegsschiffen im Kaiserreich nach China gefahren seid, um dieses Land kaputt zu machen zu der Zeit und den Staat zu zerstören. Das wäre doch zumindest die CO2-Emissionen, könnt ihr doch bitte einrechnen. Dann ist die Rechnung wieder ganz anders.
Damages
Ich will
that
damit
you
sagen,
should
wir
be
sollten nicht
paying
ganz vergessen, dass es auch eine
for
koloniale
your CO2
Geschichte
emissions
gab
there.
von
Those
CO2-Emissionen.
should be factored in. So we must not forget
Ich glaube,
our
als
colonial
angekündigt hat, aus den
history.
Kohlekraftwerken
Yeah,
auszutreten, meinte
that
irgendjemand auf Twitter,
makes me
jetzt hat jeder
smile.
CDU-Bundestagskandidat sein Hauptargument beim Klimaschutz verloren,
Because
weil ich das tatsächlich auch
when
sehr
Liberals said they wanted to phase out of coal. A reaction on that on Twitter was that now the Conservative Party has lost its main line of argument. So we are living in a different geopolitical situation, and I think the European single market does have a certain degree of power, so we should be courageous enough to set international standards, meaning climate tariffs. We are big enough to do that, and it's not really something bad. It doesn't have to be destructive. It can be to the benefit of human rights or ecology. So have a power conscience that is based on human rights and the environment. I think that would make sense, and I think it's a more meaningful debate than just using China to distract from the fact that you're actually not doing anything. Well, before you have to leave, I'd like to also address a different topic.
Dass sie gerecht sind, auch für die zukünftigen Generationen und für junge Menschen. Und wenn wir uns so die Machtverhältnisse anschauen, auch bei der Bundestagswahl, die Menschen über 50 Jahre, die machen rund 60% der Bevölkerung aus. Das heißt, wenn jetzt die Ampel tatsächlich kommen sollte, dann hätten wir das Wahlrecht mit 16, würde aber gar nicht so wirklich ins Gewicht fallen. Bräuchten wir jetzt ein Wahlrecht ab 14 oder was wäre die richtige Maßnahme?
Ich bin persönlich sehr für ein Wahlrecht ab 14 aus einer Überlegung von, ich finde, das ist ein demokratisches Recht, ich finde, es braucht einen sehr hohen Begründungsgrad, wenn staatlich ein demokratisches Recht eingeschränkt wird. Deshalb ich sehr für ein Wahlrecht ab 14 bin, das wird aber natürlich die Fälle, was ich gerade beschrieben habe. Da wird das Wahlrecht 16 nur wenig daran ändern, selbst das Wahlrecht 14 wird wenig daran ändern. Das heißt, wir haben auf der einen Seite die Situation, dass junge Menschen am längsten von den politischen Entscheidungen betroffen sind, die heute getroffen werden. Das war schon immer so, das ist auch keine neue Erfahrung, sondern das ist irgendwie ein bisschen so realitätsschuldig. Aber natürlich, was wir jetzt sozusagen bei der Klimakrise nochmal als verschärfte Entwicklung haben, ist, dass die Möglichkeiten von zukünftigen Generationen überhaupt noch Entscheidungen zu treffen zu können, eingeschränkt werden. Das finde ich einen total spannenden Punkt, wenn man sich das Bundesverfassungsgerichtsurteil genau anschaut, dann wurde ja die Freiheitseinschränkung gar nicht damit begründet, dass die Folgen der Klimakrise selbst die Freiheit einschränken, sondern dass das Nichtstun im Jetzt die Möglichkeiten des Tuns und vor allem das Tun entscheiden zu können. Also genau diese Wahlen, das ist ein wichtiger. Wie wollen wir priorisieren? Wollen wir über den Preis, über den Markt, wollen wir das Ordnungsrecht machen, dass diese Möglichkeit eingeschränkt wird. Das heißt, bei den jetzigen demokratischen Entscheidungen entscheiden wir darüber, inwieweit das democratic decisions, we are deciding whether the democratic right to decide will be preserved and maintained for the future. But that's hard to stop because the young people simply present an ever smaller part of society. So perhaps we need a new generational contract. What does it mean if older generations assume responsibility for younger generations? It's not only an old age pension, it's also the promise that we'll leave the planet to them. Because the principle of one person, one vote should be preserved. We cannot solve this problem at the polls. What we need is a change of conscience in the older generation. I think we'll continue to discuss this even further, but Ricarda Lange, I would really like to thank you for your contribution so far. Sorry you have to leave.
And maybe there's someone here in this room who would like to join the discussion when we're talking about generational justice and how can we create democratic processes and make them fair for the future. Maybe someone has a question.
Können Sie gerne, genau, dann können Sie gerne hier Platz nehmen und genau jetzt.
And if you have a question, please have a seat here. So I would like to mention one point. How can we make sure that younger people can be more involved? And I think I was very impressed, especially to see during the elections and also within the parliament. Of course, we all agree that the right to vote can start from 16, but this is only a small step. At the end, it is also about to bring people on board and include them and make or give them a responsibility. And I'm very confident, especially considering the elections. But this is not true for all the parties. But yeah, I'm still confident. At least my party has a very good offer to make. Yes, I think so as well, says Mr. Ulrich. I mean, I don't think we need to talk too much about the pre-election campaign. The CDU talked as if there are no grandchildren, and the SPD talked to young people as if they have already retired. So they didn't talk about this plus 3 or 4 degrees more that they might have when they actually will retire. And maybe I can add something. And just considering the Federal Constitutional Court and what Mr. Scholz said, our environmental policy will be very moderate. This is not a criteria. So what we have to ask is the policy we are deciding, is this adapted to fight against climate change? And of course, you have these 40 young social democrats in the Bundestag, but in fact, young people in Germany can only refer to the Federal Constitutional Court. And yeah, they were ignored, and luckily, they referred also to the Federal Constitutional Court. And let me add one more thing. It is also about forgetting about something or unlearning something. Especially the social democrats in us can remember just one simple sentence, one step in the right direction, in the wrong speed is the wrong step. And this is 100% the historical logic of social democrats. And this is also something that we can see what happened with communism. We said, oh no, we need small steps and things will get better. It was too slow. And now we have to say, oh, unfortunately, this is also true for a very major area of our time. So we need to speed up. We need to be more radical, and the Green Party nor the Social Democrats are used to this speed, and then also accepting this radicality of reality. But if I look back, I think the Social Democrats have a very special task to play here, even though it is not fully my culture as well. The Social Democrats were elected because of this security, not because of the progress, but because they wanted to choose someone or elect someone who takes responsibility. And this is the important task. I'm very much looking forward to this coalition because I do see a big step ahead, and this is absolutely necessary. And I think that the Social Democratic Party can also convey this message. But I would need to be careful. I don't think that considering something doesn't mean that we slow down. It means that we have to we shouldn't see the question of the climate change as a battle, but we need to transfer it into actions, not just talk about it, but just be active. And I think that the Social Democrats have the task to also bring people together and also say that they fear this change. And maybe we can also say we need this change. There is no other choice. So thank you for joining us here on stage. Maybe you want to say something. Yes, I'm back on stage. I mean, I will leave in a second, but let me say one sentence. I think that we have to say that the democratic process that we have is made in a way that we always decide in favor for the present. And the politics that we make are in favor for the present situation. And if people vote something different, then it is always risky. So my question is, when can we create a system that gives us the possibility to include us in decisions so that at the end we can have decide about or have a veto and say that we want to do things differently. So, for example, we can defend our interests for the future and then starting to negotiate and also what has been discussed in Parliament. So everything is here and we can do all this, and if we don't do it, then in 10 years we will still lead the same discussions because the principles are still the same. So I shared your opinion for a very long time, but I don't think this is true anymore. If it's right that in this decade we need to make this ecological change, then I don't think that it's time for changing the institution. I mean, I understand what they are doing in the exploration talks. They are talking about the resources, how to approach these resources in a different way. But if you do this differently in the ministries, you need just 2 years until they move or organize or plan a move. If we're talking about a third chamber, for example, or something really fundamental that is enshrined in our law, this will need even more time. And this is something that we shouldn't underestimate. So these elections were very strange in this context, but we have the decision of the Federal Constitutional Court, and we have this climate protection law from 2019. That's something we don't need to discuss, but there was something good in it. Every year, by mid-March, we need to see the numbers for reduction, and if these numbers are not enough, they need to be adjusted. So this government will either have to make a kind of policy to adjust, to have the numbers matching. Otherwise, it will be really complicated. Of course, the society plays a role, and some mass demonstrations will play a role mid-March, so be ready and prepared for mid-March. So we are not just a democracy, but also state of justice. And therefore, we need to protect also. So I would suggest that we can support young people. So when we're talking, so your comment was about the future councils that exist in some areas. So should we have something like this on a federal level that can maybe look at some drafts for laws, or would this take even longer, and that's why it's not so efficient and wise to do so? What do you think? I have to admit that I really didn't think of it, and that's why I cannot really answer your question. So otherwise it would just be empty words. But I am fully with you when you say every structural change is slowing down the process, and we don't have time. So we agree on this. However, I am optimistic, and I'm confident that this new coalition can use this impetus or create an impetus because people trust them for many different reasons. And in the East, the connection to parties is really problematic. That's why for the Social Democrats it was really important in the exploration talks to mention this 12 euro of minimum wage. And that's why it was also important for the Green Party to talk about the climate protection goals. And the fact that we have to deliver result, not at the end of 4 years, but at the beginning, this is my hope for this new impetus that we might have. So I don't want to talk about the East too much, but this phase that is behind us, where politicians didn't do much in this context, and that's why ecology was kind of privatized. So everyone was, some people did something, but not really together. And I think this is something that could change. So it could be possible to say, so whoever is doing something individually is nothing to replace for what the politicians didn't do, but it's an additional thing. And this is a big change. And what is also important when we are talking about identity, in this time, so whoever criticized everything or whoever protested against it, so the politicians usually said, oh, we don't want to do anything against you. You can, as a government, can also say, this is our project, and climate protection is the main goal. You cannot stop us. You can only vote someone else in 4 years. So being decisive, and this is also a form of democracy. They can be very decisive and also enjoy the process, and whoever likes it can join the process, but not and then also, and if you don't, whoever doesn't like it can change in 4 years. I'm very happy to see that 3 more people raised their hands and would like to join us here on stage.
Zunächst einmal Magali. Ihr könnt auch einfach herkommen. Also das, sobald ein Platz frei ist,
here. Feel free to take the seat whenever it's empty.
Hallo. Vielleicht magst du dich noch mal kurz vorstellen und
perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, hört man mich jetzt? Ja.
Yes, can you
ich bin Magali, ich arbeite beim Futurium.
I'm Magali, I work at the Futurium in Berlin,
und insbesondere mit der Zukunft der Demokratie.
Every day,
ich habe mich gemeldet, weil mir die Lösungen, die diskutiert wurden, noch so ein bisschen zu wenig radikal sind. Also ich glaube, Hanne Bundesminister hat ja so ein bisschen schon interveniert und gesagt,
Mr. Burmeister, I think, intervened and said we need democratic innovations in order to deal better with climate change in the future.
Ich glaube aber, das ist, was Herr Ulrich gerade meinte, wir haben eigentlich keine Zeit, um diese strukturellen
when listening to Mr. Ulrich, who says we don't have the time to implement the structural changes,
nicht die
that's
Zeit
not
haben, um ein zukunftsfähiges politisches System aufzubauen.
acceptable. It can't be that we don't have the time to set up a solid political system to deal with climate change. There's not only climate change, there's also social change, structural change. So we need to do something now in order to be fit for the future. So perhaps it's about electing a spokesperson, nominating a spokesperson for the younger generation, having sustainability councils. A democracy shouldn't produce the best result, but a result that is based on a majority. And the question is, how can we attain these majorities in the future? Would someone like to reply to
richtig, dass wir auch lernen, Macht zu teilen, um Macht zu gewinnen. Also Macht teilen im Sinne von Selbstermächtigung.
and to win power, to empower ourselves, if you like.
Wieder den Ossi.
And here I think I'm representing an East German person again.
Der sehr gut diese Transformation beschrieben hat. Und der hat auch nochmal beschrieben, naja, auch viele Beteiligungsformen oder demokratische Beteiligungsformen sind ja auch gelernte, obwohl sie nie gewachsen sind. Und auch da war die Debatte bei uns forms that we've learned, andere Formen der Beteiligung. Damals gab es runde Tische, im Westen gab es den Willy Brandt-Moment und so weiter. Kriegt man das auch wieder hin? Also das ist natürlich auch erstmal nur eine Überschrift, Macht zu teilen. Das funktioniert vielleicht vor Ort in den Kommunen noch am besten, wenn man auch sagt, okay, dort kann man mitgestalten, aber die Frage ist, wie übersetzen wir das eben auch in die große Politik, ohne dass es jetzt wieder Zeit kostet. Aber ich finde schon, dass wir eine lebendigere Demokratie brauchen, die jetzt auch Macht teilen.
Ist das nicht der Punkt, dass wir jetzt eben nicht nur daran denken können, ja, die nächsten 5 Jahre müssen wir schnell handeln fürs Klima, sondern wir müssen ja in 100-Jahreszyklen denken. Also wir müssen ja jetzt was machen, damit wir in Zukunft Demokratie haben,
in order to save our climates. I think we have to think 100 years ahead. We have to maintain a democracy with the capacity to act. Now, you're the East German person, I'm the grandfather now. I remember the neoliberal phase where at a weekly basis we heard that federalism in Germany is not effective enough. Couldn't we just pool federal states, link them together in an administrative reform? That would have never worked because it did require the agreement of the upper house of parliament, the Bundesrat. Of course, you're right, you can do both things in parallel. However, I think this government has so much on its plate already. All the things that the former government, and I think the SPD was part of that, did not do. So I don't think they'll be able to do it all in 5 years. Yeah, but let me pick you up on that. It's not that I want to shift responsibility to someone else, but we won't be able to save the climate with the German federal government alone. There are so many matters that have to be decided at local or regional level, and there are many more possibilities of participation. Therefore, I would never say, oh, it's climate change, that's a federal matter. Well, but with the new government, I'm seeing that they are really tough. They're saying we have to build wind turbines, we have to build over land power lines or overhead power lines. And perhaps this wild bird could fly a little lower so that it doesn't collide with the wind turbine. Okay, yeah, but that's based on science and that's versus policy making. In the end, it's about weighing these lines of arguments and about taking decisions. I mean, the scientists, they have the fundamental knowledge about matters, and that means that we need much more renewable energies, and if an approval procedure takes several months to years, it'll get us nowhere. So we need to be faster in those decisions. Magali, did you want to say something?
Immer geht die Politik etc. Ich wollte nur sagen, ich glaube, es gibt ja auch Ideen, die aus der Zivilgesellschaft herauskommen. In Japan gibt es ja das Future Design Movement,
from the civil society, like the Future Design Movement from Japan,
auf kommunaler Ebene ganz viel praktiziert. Die Hälfte der TeilnehmerInnen bekommt eine Stula und muss sich in die Perspektive der zukünftigen Generation einsetzen, die andere restliche ist in der jetzigen Perspektive.
Es gibt Studien, das funktioniert, man kann so langfristig denken erlernen und das kann man einfach machen. Da braucht man the other half remains in their age, so to speak, and I think they're really producing brilliant results. I just want the civil society not to be underrepresented here.
Dann kommt jetzt Kypra zu uns.
Okay, there's another person who would like to take the seat. And another round of applause, please.
Für alle, die dich noch nicht kennen sollten,
who don't know you, could you just briefly present yourself?
Hi, mein Name ist Kypra.
I'm Kypra.
Ich bin Autorin.
I'm an author.
Und
Meine Frage ist eigentlich eher ein bisschen auch inspiriert von dem, was Gabi jetzt zuletzt gefragt hat, aber auch von unserem Essen heute. Und der Punkt ist, wir haben heute über die Dringlichkeit gesprochen, über Zeit gesprochen und die Zeit, die wir nicht haben, die wir verpassen. Und mich hat in den letzten Jahren ein Zitat sehr wieder ins Nachdenken gebracht, und zwar von dem Investigativreporter der New York Times, Ron Suskind, der ein Interview führte mit einem ehemaligen Chefberater von dem ehemaligen US-Präsidenten George W. Bush, der sagte in einem geheimen Gespräch anonym Folgendes: George W. Bush, und dann meint er die US-Regierung, when we act, we create realities, and those you will study. And while you study those realities, we'll act again, creating new realities, and those you can study again. And this is how things will be put into order. We are history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to study just what we do. Und was wir ja eigentlich machen, medial, aber auch in der Politik, im politischen Diskurs, ist eigentlich zu analysieren, zu dekonstruieren, zu hinterfragen, und währenddessen passieren einfach Dinge. Was aber in den letzten Jahren passiert ist, zum Beispiel mit Fridays for Future, ist, dass wir einfach mit einer Realität konfrontiert worden sind, die uns bevorsteht, und zwar auf eine radikale Art und Weise. Und nun stellen wir uns die Frage der Zeit und der Dringlichkeit, und ich frage mich, ab welchem Punkt sollten wir aufhören zu warten? Ab welchem Punkt sollten wir aufhören zu warten, dass sich innerhalb der bestehenden politischen Strukturen genug tut, um zukünftiges Leben, menschliches Leben zumindest, auf diesem Planeten aufrechtzuerhalten? Und wann geht es eigentlich mehr darum, einfach Menschen vor vollendete Tatsachen zu stellen, indem wir einfach radikal anders leben? Weil unser bestehendes Leben, die Art und Weise, wie wir konsumieren, reisen, denken, schreiben, kommunizieren, baut ja auf diesen Strukturen auf und auf der Ausbeutung aller anderen Lebewesen, mit denen wir zusammenleben. Wann ist es, spätestens wann sollten wir aufhören, diese Podien zu führen?
To lead these discussions? That's my question.
Ich weiß nicht, es gibt doch keinen Startpunkt oder sowas.
Well, I'm not sure. There's no such thing as a starting point, I think.
Also mit diesem Wahlkampf, der Wahlkampf war nochmal ein Versuch, einen großen Teil der Wirklichkeit auszublenden und einen großen Teil der Wahrheit nicht zu sagen. Und die kommen jetzt nach und nach auf den Tisch. So, jetzt, das ist nicht fair gegenüber den Wählerinnen und Wählern, dass man das nicht so laut gesagt hat, aber so wird es sein. Es wird zum Beispiel gesagt, die Grünen sind eine Verzichtspartei. Dann haben die Grünen gesagt, nein,
the Green Party is a party of renouncing things, of reducing things. And then the Green Party said, no, that's not true. Of course, we're a little bit against flying, but then we're building these high-speed railway networks that makes flying superfluous, but they never said when. Well, in 10 years, but up until then, we have to fly less. And it can't be that only the rich people can fly. It can't be that we continue flying as we do.
Wird ein 100-Tage-Programm jetzt machen, ja?
So this government will have a 100-day program regarding climate change. That sounds very fast, but as a matter of fact, it means that the first measures that will be taken take an entire year because they have to be passed in the upper house of parliament. And then there is a person with a shovel starting to build, meaning that the CO2 emissions targets cannot be met if we don't tell people that your policy of renunciation
Und das bezieht sich dann auf das reichere, die reiche Hälfte unserer Gesellschaft. Und dann wird man anfangen zu sprechen über, wieso seid ihr eigentlich so viel reicher und was genau macht ihr damit? Also ich glaube, das hat schon begonnen, nur der Wahlkampf hat nochmal sowas rübergelegt. Aber in den Koalitionsverhandlungen in der Regierung wird schon darüber gesprochen und wir können ja alle drüber sprechen.
Currently taking place, perhaps the electoral campaign just discovered it.
Jeder kann
ja
selber anfangen. Also das bestimmt ja jeder selber, was sein Teil dazu beiträgt oder was sein eigener Anteil ist, das so zu verändern, dass man den eigenen Ansprüchen und der künftigen Generation gerecht wird. Man wird jetzt von mir als Vertreter der politischen Kultur nicht den Aufruf zur Revolution hören.
I'm a representative of the political culture.
I'm
not going to
invite
you to carry out a revolution.
Und ich bin mir auch nicht so sicher, ob tatsächlich eine Verzichtsrhetorik hilft, oder ob man es nicht umdrehen muss und daraus eine Gewinnrhetorik machen muss, die Veränderung klar macht, weil es muss sich etwas ändern. Das stelle ich überhaupt nicht in Frage. Aber ich verliere Menschen, wenn ich ihnen sage, das und das geht nicht mehr, die Leute dann schnell der Meinung sind, wenn ich auf etwas verzichten will, dann stimmt es einfach nicht. Und dann, das meine ich für uns mit dieser, sind wir wieder in dieser Kulturdiskussion, dann ist es gar nicht eine Frage der besten Lösung und was bietet man an, sondern dann bist du dafür oder bist du dagegen und wir müssen es aus dieser Kulturkampfdimension
rausholen.
Yes, you're right, but since you're so much in favor of balancing things,
keinerlei Verzicht zu der Aussage, meinen Kindern soll es einmal besser gehen. Und wenn man das
I don't accept renunciation for the climate, but at the same time, I want my future generation to have a good life.
Ich möchte einmal kurz nur reagieren vorher. Und zwar, ich denke, dass sehr, sehr viele junge Menschen gerade sehr ungeduldig sind und dass es auch darum geht, die Zukunft für die Demokratie zu gewinnen. Und ich glaube, dass während in deinem vorherigen Buch war ein sehr schönes Zitat, und zwar, ich muss mich kurz korrigieren, unsere aktuelle Welt und unser System baut auf der Demut der Gedemütigten auf. Und die aktuell Gedemütigten sind die jungen Menschen, das ist der globale Süden, das sind Menschen, die nicht wählen dürfen, weil sie keinen deutschen Pass besitzen. Das sind sehr, sehr viele Menschen und ihre Demut, die Demut der Gedemütigten wird irgendwann aufgebraucht sein. Und ich glaube, dass das nicht lange hin ist dahin. Und ich glaube auch diese Menschen, auch wenn sie jetzt vielleicht politisch nicht die gleichen Schalthebel besitzen, wie jetzt die Älteren, die einfach durch ihre schiere Zahl eine gewisse Dominanz darstellen, dass um diese Menschen geworben werden muss, einerseits. Und das Zweite ist, dass zum Beispiel dieses Thema Verzicht, ich finde andere Fragen viel wichtiger, nämlich wie kommen wir zu der Annahme, dass es uns zusteht? Wie kommen wir zu der Annahme, dass es uns zusteht, bloß weil wir Herrschaft ausüben über die Natur, zu glauben, wir seien nicht in der Verantwortung, sie zu erhalten? Wie kommen wir dazu, dass der Mensch sich Pflanzen, Tieren, Gebirgen und Gesteinen überleben glaubt, durch die pure Aussage, sie nun zu besitzen. Und das sind die viel spannenderen Fragen als Menschen, finde ich, dazu zu überreden, dass sich keinerlei Veränderung in ihren Lebensumständen tun wird oder dass sie nichts verzichten würden. Ich finde, das ist anmaßend und ein eklatanter Mangel an Demut, dass Menschen glauben, dass es ihnen zustehen würde.
Ich weiß nicht, ob Sie mich jetzt missverstanden haben oder wie Sie es verstehen wollten. Ich habe nicht
I'm not sure if you misunderstood me or if you wanted to misunderstand me. So I didn't say that it's about renunciation. What I mean is that
die Menschen auf eine andere Art und Weise
we could just approach people in a different way by saying, for example, why do we think that it's something that we own? Well, I am a bit cautious because I come from a federal state in Germany where during the last elections we almost had the AfD being the strongest party. So in my federal state, the progressive parties, the left, the Green and the Social Democrats don't even get 1/3 of the votes. And here, there's no point accepting the fact that we have the right to create. It is not about the discourse in this context, but it's more about what do we have to do, how can we act. So I don't think that there is any other federal state that accepts AfD voters. Well, what I try to explain is that in my federal state we already had this discussion within those parties, and we said who is a good Democrat and who is not. What I try to say here is the following. So, if I want to convince everyone that I'm right, I probably will have the third or fourth chamber. The question we have to ask ourselves, how can we start and be active? And if we approach those and also say that we don't accept your opinion, and if someone says, oh, I don't want this, I want to fly to Mallorca regularly, I want to eat cheap meat, I think it's important to talk to them, and that's why I try to explain before. If I accept that they can have their own world, and you will have everything that is fine for you, your ideal world or cozy world, but there will have to be some changes. And therefore I need to accept them and not approach them with disdain. Otherwise, there's no point having a majority. It's impossible to get a majority. Just one more sentence. I would like to ask Joy to join me on stage, and also thank you, Bra. Well, allow me to add one more sentence. Having someone who is against or having opponents can also create a commonality. I would like to ask you to be really brief with your question. Well, it is a short question. I'm Joy. So what I'm missing here is vivid democracy. Do we need different institutions? And I would like to ask a question about the referendum. We saw that many people supported something that most of the parties rejected, and many people voted for this expropriation, and I asked myself, so the representatives in the parties, and then the exploration talks, etc. Do we have a majority here? And I think in our society we also have a support for radical climate protection measures, and also people do support this raising CO2 prices, but prices for CO2 emissions. And do we maybe need a third or fourth chamber to decide, or is it something that we can forget about the next 20 years and also put something on the agenda for a referendum? So can we even speed up thanks to a referendum? So I'm very skeptical, critical, and I have two reasons for this. The first one is we've experienced it in Hamburg. where there was a referendum about schools, and the richer parts of the city had the possibility to decide against the actual majority. So it was about reform of the school system, and the richer parts of the city said, we don't want this, we want things to stay as they are. And they had the means to do so, and the others didn't even vote for different reasons. They thought that they were either overwhelmed or thought it's not important. So I'm not against a referendum, but not as a replacement, but more like something additional. And what if there is no majority? Because there are some topics we will have to tackle. And now we are not talking about a majority at a referendum. We have to take action. And I represent the representative democracy, and I wish that there is a more vivid democracy. However, I fear that if we focus on this tool, we might not be able to use everything. And yeah, that's something we've also experienced. I feel a bit embarrassed to say, but I think he's right. Okay, so if you agree, we need a round of applause. And let me also use the opportunity to thank you to everyone who joined us on stage. I would also like to thank everyone who followed us via the live stream. I would also like to thank you. So if you want, feel free to join us for dinner. We will have free drinks until 9 p.m. thanks to our sponsors. I think we've learned a lot about improving democratic processes, how to speed up the process and how to create space and time. And of course, we can continue with this debate. I wish you very fruitful debates this evening. And I would also like to thank the Progressive Center. So this was the closing panel of Innocracy. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Paul Jürgensen and Paulina Fröhlich and the entire team. You did a great job. And thank you for making Innocracy possible. And I wish you a wonderful evening.